Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be tackling a project that I've been putting off for almost a year at this point, which is to transform these shirts— oh no, it fell off the hanger. Okay, I got him back on. To transform these shirts into a two-piece color block ensemble consisting of a tank top and a pair of shorts. I bought these shirts last year, middle of the summer, because I went through a little phase where I decided that instead of buying flat yardage for my garments, I was going to instead buy existing garments from thrift stores or discount clothing stores for fabric in order to make new things out of them. So I went to Ross and I bought 4 of these shirts, 2 in white and 2 in black. They were $10 a piece with the exception of this one, which I'm not sure if you can really tell, but there is some staining on it, like some marks or some staining or whatever down here, so it was discounted to $7. So $37 investment in total. They are plus size shirts, and I know that there is some controversy online and in the fashion world about straight size people buying plus size clothing for themselves, but my justification for buying these is that they were ugly. And one of the big things for me that makes them ugly is the way that they are seamed together. There is a Y-shaped panel running from the shoulders down to the hem, and then there's 2 side blocks here and here in the front, and then there's a full back piece on the top and then another longer back piece on the bottom, which already feels like completely unnecessary to me in the seaming. But in addition to that, the bottom panels on the front and the back are gathered just a little bit, just like this much. Enough that you can tell that it's gathered, but not enough that I feel like it really adds anything to the piece. And it just, I don't know, it just looks really messy. So I don't feel as bad taking them for myself to reuse. So like I said, I'm going to be making a tank top and a pair of shorts out of these, and in order to cut the pieces, I am first going to be cutting apart all of the seams, separating the panels, and then making like quilt blocks out of them pretty much, which I'm then going to place my pattern pieces on and cut apart and sew together from there as if they were proper pieces of yardage. So without further ado, let's get into the construction. For my patterns, I'm going to be using this self-drafted one, which was traced off of a tank top that I already have in my wardrobe, and then this vintage Simplicity one that I thrifted a couple months ago. It's from 1996, as is probably very obvious by looking at that image right there. I have never used this pattern up to this point, but all of the pieces are factory folded, so there's no issues with things being missing or anything like that, so that's good. That said, there are a couple of alterations that need to take place before I can start the sewing process. Starting with the top, this was drafted for stretch fabric, not woven fabric. And although the shirt fabric does have some stretch to it, it does have some ease, it's not enough that I can just cut this as is and have it fit correctly. So I've decided to add about 3 inches overall to the sides, 1 inch at the back side seams and ½ inch at the front side seams. And I have little notes here saying add 1 inch here and ½ inch here so that I remember to do that whenever it comes time to cut the tank top fabric. Moving on to the shorts, the other alteration that I need to do, very important alteration, is to add pockets, because as you can see, the back and the front are attached in one unit and there are no side seams. And there's also no patch pockets or anything included like that with the pattern, so I'm going to have to add my own. I'm not 100% certain whether I want to add just back pockets or just front pockets or both, but I do need at least 2 pockets, whether front or back. But before I can do any of that, I have to cut my fabric. And before I can cut my fabric, I have to make my fabric. I'm starting with the tank top because that's much more straightforward. And I'm debating right now whether I want to do a full black front and a full white back, or if I want to split them down the centers and do like black, white, white, black for the front and back. I'm leaning more toward the split front thing. I think it would look a little more balanced and not quite as like large and awkward if I split them. So I think that's where I'm gonna go from here. All right, it's a few hours later and I now have a back and a front that are ready to be sewn. I decided to keep it really, really simple and just do very large vertical color blocks. Although now that I'm looking at it, it's kind of giving referee shirt, but I'm in too deep to change anything, and I really don't feel like changing anything, so I'm just gonna live with it and move on. I ended up going with the split color situation for the center front and the center back, although unfortunately the center back pieces, with the way that the V-neck was cut in the original front, the back piece was too high to get it all in one unit, so I did have to add a little additional piece here, which I just top stitched and then serged on the back. All of the panels are serged on the back. I also added the extra seam allowance to the sides, like I mentioned earlier. And now it is time to assemble the tank top together. All right, I have sewn the shoulders and the side seams together, and there are some issues going on. First of all, in the back here, there is some bubbling going on at the very top. I think that's just because of the panel that I had to insert at the top is kind of fighting against the curve of the piece that I attached it to. I'm not really that worried about it though. It's in the back of me. I don't really care. What I do care about, however, is the drooping / dog earring that I'm getting at the sides here. The obvious solution to this is just to pinch out the excess in the underarm, but I worry that if I do that, I'm not gonna have enough room to pull it over my head because there's not as much stretch in this fabric. So what I might do is actually slit the underarm and then try to fold the fabric under at either side so I open up the underarm a bit more. So the fabric itself is going away, but the arm's eye is made larger so it gives me more room to be able to take it off and put it on. I'm gonna start by removing a 1/2 inch from the back specifically because I added 1/2 inch to the front and a full inch to the back. We're gonna experiment and see what's happening before we move on. All right, so I've taken the side seams in by 1/2 inch on both sides. It didn't really do much, but slitting the underarm fixed the issue pretty much completely. I did not cut anything out of the underarm, I just cut into the side seam and kind of spread the fabric or folded the fabric back, and it's no longer gaping away from my body as much as it is on this side. I am gonna cut off some of the excess that I have going on here, but I'm not going to cut off all of it as it is folded because I'm gonna be finishing these arm's eyes with bias tape, and if I cut off exactly what I have folded and then put the bias tape on, it's going to make the arm's eye ride a lot lower than I want it to. Allegedly, according to my pattern, I added 5/8 of an inch allowance to the entire piece. But if that's true for both the neckline and the arm's eye, then the strap is gonna be this wide, and I don't want that. So I think for the neckline, I'm only gonna do 1/4 of an inch, and then for the underarm, I'm probably gonna do 3/8 or so. So I'm gonna remark the area, cut off what needs to be cut off, and then check back in whenever I have finished all of the edges with bias tape. Update. It's done! Yay! Yay, so exciting. The arm's eye is still gaping away from my body a little bit, even after putting the bias tape on, but it's not to the point where I really feel compelled to fix it, because to be so completely and honestly fucking for real with all of you, I've had these shirts in my possession for almost a year, and I'm sick of looking at them, and at this point, I just want to get this project done so I can move on to bigger and better things. So I'm gonna leave it as it is, and just consider the shirt done, and move on to the shorts. Okay, there's been a change of plans. Earlier in the video, I said I was going to be using this here Vintage Simplicity pattern to make my shorts with. But this here Vintage Simplicity pattern does not have a side seam, nor does it have pockets included, so I would have had to draft patch pockets and figure out the placement after I had constructed them. But I went thrifting yesterday, and on said thrift trip, I found this here Vintage Simplicity pattern, which just so happens to be for a pair of elastic-waisted shorts or pants, and just so happened to be in my size. And for a grand price of 25 cents, I snatched it up immediately because I figured it just had to be destiny. However, I was dumb, and I did not check the envelope before purchasing it to make sure that all of the pieces were present, and lo and behold, they were not. In fact, over half of the pieces were missing. I do not have any of the pieces for views 1 through 3, which are the longer shorts, the shorter shorts, and the pants, nor the pockets, back or front. But I do have all of the pieces for view number 4, which is a pair of color-blocked shorts, which fits in thematically with the rest of this project. So even though I'm missing the majority of the pattern pieces, I'm still going to be using this pattern instead of the other one because the color blocking design is already done for me. That said, I do still need to make a couple of alterations before I can really get started with this, the biggest one being I need to add pockets. Even though the other 3 views have pockets, both front and back, view 4 doesn't have either. And I can understand why they would want to omit the back pockets because it would get in the way of the rest of the design with the color blocking, but it really doesn't make sense to me why they wouldn't have inseam pockets in there because that wouldn't interfere whatsoever. Whatever the logic was behind that decision, the decision was made, so there are no placement dots or lines or anything like that on the pattern pieces for view 4. So I have to add those, but that's not going to be super difficult, and I can just use a pocket pattern from one of my other many elastic waist pants patterns. The other thing that I have to do is lengthen the shorts because according to the measurements on the back, side note, I love that they call these jams. I think that's so silly and so funny and so very 1986, which is when this is from. But the side length is 14.5 inches, which on me hits about mid-thigh and is just a little bit too short for my preference. So I'm going to be adding 5/8 of an inch to the bottom of the top pieces and 5/8 of an inch to the top of the bottom pieces. And then I'm also going to be taking the hem down from 1 1/8 to 5/8. So that gives me a total of 1 3/4 of extra length, which lands me at 16 1/4 inches or so when all is said and done. I'm gonna make the alterations and then I will make my quilt blocks and then we can proceed with the sewing. Alright, I have cut all of my shorts pieces as well as the inseam pocket pieces, which I took from another pattern, and as you can see here, I have remarked little dots and notches on the shorts pattern pieces so that I know where to put them. Fortunately, I was able to cut the majority of these pieces out of single layers of fabric. I only had to piece 2 sections together, and the way that the color blocking is done, the left and right pieces on the front and backs of the body are the same color, so meaning the upper right back and the upper left front are both black, and vice versa for the white on the other side. That'll make a lot more sense as I begin the construction process now. I fucked up the shorts. Or rather, I fucked up the color blocking. I've gotten the backs, these are the backs, sewn to each other along the crotch seam, same thing with the fronts, and I realized only after doing so that I have misaligned the color blocking. Originally, I wanted the upper pieces and the lower pieces to be the same color on the side seams, and clearly that did not happen. Unfortunately, it is too late to really do anything about it because I've already sewn and serged everything. We're just gonna move on to the pockets specifically, which I'm gonna explain briefly before I put them in. So like I said earlier in the video, I took this pocket pattern from another pattern that I had in my possession already, and I just wanted to explain how I got the placement lines and the placement markings onto this pattern. So the dots here and here represent the actual opening of the pocket, and then the bottom here and the top here would just be sewn into the side seam to anchor it in place. And this is a pretty significant top portion here. So what I decided to do was I aligned the top edge of the pocket with the fold line for what will become the casing for the elastic in the waistband, which I have represented by this little notch here. And then from there, I just transferred the markings from the pocket pattern onto the shorts pattern. It'll be sewn from here to here, here to here, and then around the edge of the pocket. And then when it's time to do the waistband, I will fold this casing under on the notch, and then this seam allowance will also get folded up, and that top edge of the pocket will be fully encased within the waistband casing and hidden from view. And then all of the other visible edges will be serged and whatnot to clean them up. With that explained, I am now going to attach the pockets to the side seam so that I can then sew the side seams together. I'm about halfway through the pocket attachment steps at this point. As you can see, the pockets have been serged around their outer edges, and they have been individually attached to their side seams, which have also been serged. The next step is going to be attaching the front shorts to the back shorts along the side seams, leaving an opening, of course, between the dots so that the pocket can be accessed. I just wanted to point out the order in which I finished my edges. I first started by serging the curved edges of the pockets while they were detached from the body so that I didn't have, work around this curved or notched point here, and that would have been really, really difficult to do and would have had a very high potential for mangling the edge, which would have thrown off my stitching later on. And then after attaching the individual pieces, I then serged the individual edges so that they were all finished and all ready to go before attaching the side seams, so that, again, I didn't have to try to navigate multiple awkward layers and after they were attached. I did not, however, finish the top edge of the pocket because it's going to be concealed by the waistband casing, so there's really no point in finishing it. I just wanted to point that out because the order of operations as it relates to your seam finishes is just as important as order of operations with the actual sewing of the garment or whatever it is that you're putting together. Doing these finishes as early as possible and putting thought into when it would be best to do your finishes can save you a lot of time and a lot of headache and potentially a lot of unpicking of seams later on in the process. So now that that's out of the way, the side seams and the inseam have been sewn together, so now it is time to move on to the waistband, which I'm actually going to be doing differently than how they instruct me to do it in the pattern. The pattern calls for 2 pieces of elastic as well as a drawstring, so the casing ends up having 3 separate channels, the drawstring in the middle and the elastic on the top and the bottom. I do not want a drawstring, however. I'm just going to be doing 2 pieces of elastic, and my elastic in question is 1/2 inch wide. And generally speaking, you want your elastic casings to be no greater than 1/8 inch wider than whatever your elastic measures. So if I have 1/2 inch wide elastic, I would want my casing to be 5/8 of an inch wide. If I make it larger than that, there's a chance that the elastic is going to twist in the casing, and if I make it smaller than that, then the elastic is not going to fit in the casing. So I have folded the casing over along the fold line, and as you can see, the top of the pocket has been tucked nicely up underneath here. And I'm gonna stitch 5/8 of an inch down from the top folded edge to create my first channel, leaving a gap in the center here so that I can actually insert the elastic. And then I'm going to measure down from that line an additional 5/8 of an inch, mark that line with thread, fold the edge up underneath there, and then stitch the casing down, again leaving a gap in the center so that I can insert the elastic in later. Before I do that, however, I wanted to share a little tip that you can use in the event that you, like me, are too lazy to switch your thread colors while you're working on a color-blocked project, but still want your thread colors to match the fabric that you're sewing. Rather than using the same color for the top and bobbin threads, you can instead use one of each. So here I have white in the bobbin and black on top. Doing this does require more thought and attention on your part because you want to make sure that whatever way the fabric is facing is going to correspond with whatever the way the threads are facing. So in my case, I'm looking at the wrong side, the inside of my shorts right now. The black thread is on top, the white is on bottom. That means whenever I take this off, on the right side, you will see the white threads and the black threads will be on the wrong side. Conversely, when I move to the black sections, I would need to flip this around so that I'm sewing on the right side because the black thread will be on the top. Here's an example of what I'm talking about. As you see here, on the inside, we have black thread, but on the outside, we have white thread. If you look closely, you can see hints of the black thread peeking through on the white, but from a distance, it's really not going to be that noticeable. And to me, I think it is well worth it to have a little bit of the black thread showing if it means that I don't have to rethread my machine every couple of minutes to match the thread color to the fabric that I'm using. Alright, the casings have been sewn, the elastic has been inserted, and the shorts are finally at a point where I can try them on and see how they look. And overall, they're looking fairly good. That said though, I do feel like the shorts are fitting a little too boxily, specifically between my legs. They seem fine out here, but there feels like there's just a little bit too much fabric happening in the crotch area. I think it's just a little too rectangular and there needs to be a little more shaping. I also think that the crotch is riding a little too low, so I'm gonna try to raise the entire inseam up and heighten the crotch by about 1/2 inch to start and see where that takes me. So I'm gonna put these back under the machine and try to make that alteration, and I will check back in a minute to show y'all how it looks. I have returned from the sewing machine. Moving the crotch up was the right choice. Crotch placement itself does not feel as awkward as it did before, and the legs feel like they are a little bit more manageable in terms of bulk. But they are still kind of feeling a little bit too baggy for me, so while I'm gonna keep the top of the inseam, that is the intersection between the back and front crotch seams, where it is at the 1/2 inch raised line, I'm going to continue to taper the inner portions of the legs in. I'm gonna start with another 1/2 inch, so I'm gonna mark 1/2 inch away from the seam at the very bottom, and then just draw a line, gradually tapering it back to 0 at the crotch intersection point, but we are definitely heading in the right direction. I have returned once again, and I've also moved over slightly so that you can see a bit better between my legs. And the other reason that you can see a bit better between my legs is because there's not as much fabric there anymore. I actually ended up moving the bottom of the inseam in by 5/8 of an inch, not just 1/2 inch, while still keeping the new 1/2 inch raised crotch intersection point the same, and I am very, very satisfied with how they are looking. When I move my legs and simulate walking, the fabric isn't knocking into itself as much anymore, but it's also not coming in so much that it's throwing the rest of the piece off balance. So from here, I am going to trim off all of the excess allowance that I have in the crotch region now and serge it to finish it. Then I'm going to serge the raw edges down here and hem them, and then the next time that you see me, the full ensemble will be completed. And here is that completed ensemble in question. I'm wearing it with the tank top tucked in because if I leave it hanging outside of the shorts, it looks absolutely fucking terrible. I was debating cropping it shorter so it doesn't look as absolutely fucking terrible, but then I decided against it because, well, I just didn't want to. And watching this footage back, I'm actually kinda happy that I fucked up the color blocking at the sides of the shorts, because the more I look at them, the more that I like how it ended up turning out. I feel like this whole ensemble is very much giving casual jester, like what a jester would wear to the gym, or as pajamas, perhaps? As a collector of porcelain jester dolls, I find that very pleasing, and I hope that you do too. Thanks for watching.